On the surface, World War I appears to be one of history's more pointless conflicts. What began with the assassination of an obscure Austrian archduke quickly spiraled into a 4-year-long global war that killed an estimated 40 million people. But why did it happen? And what was so significant about this war that it led to such massive loss of life? Well, for starters, this was by far the largest war that the world had ever seen. Previous wars only involved 2 opposing sides, but World War I featured a total of 30, with each side split between the Central Powers and the Triple Entente. In fact, every single country in the world would either join the war or remain neutral throughout it. This included nations that had never even met, such as Japan and Brazil. The fighting itself was also more intense than previous wars. For the first time, entire armies could be wiped out in a single day, thanks to new technologies such as machine guns, poison gas, and tanks. Soldiers no longer fought on horseback with swords and muskets, but instead were stuck knee-deep in mud, firing blindly at the enemy. While officers once led from the front line, now they directed their troops from far behind in specially designed armored vehicles. But perhaps most importantly, World War I was the first truly global conflict. It didn't just take place in Europe, but spanned every continent except Antarctica. Battles were fought across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, as well as over the Middle East and Africa. But why did this happen? Well, before the war, European countries were engaged in a massive arms race. Each country wanted to demonstrate its military superiority and protect its overseas colonies. They also wanted to be prepared for any future wars. After all, this was the period of history known as the Belle Époque, or Beautiful Age. People genuinely believed that war was no longer possible. However, there was one small problem with this plan. To maintain such large militaries, you need lots of resources. And believe it or not, Europeans weren't exactly good at sharing. Take, for example, the Moroccan city of Tangier. In 1906, it was occupied by French, British, Spanish, and Portuguese troops after a series of international incidents. Control over the city was divided between these 4 powers, much to the annoyance of the Sultan of Morocco. Then there was the German Empire, which had recently become a world power. They controlled vast territories in Africa, including German East Africa, German Southwest Africa, and German Cameroon, all of which were claimed from the Portuguese, British, and Spanish. Needless to say, the Germans weren't keen on giving any of this land back. And finally, there was Russia, which had long sought to expand its influence in the region. However, they were blocked by the Ottoman Empire, who controlled key waterways such as the Bosporus Strait and the Dardanelles. So, with everyone refusing to budge, the stage was set for war. It began, as we all know, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his wife Sophie by a Serbian nationalist. Although this event is often referred to as the catalyst of the war, it was merely the spark that ignited the powder keg. In reality, Europe was already on the verge of war due to the complex network of alliances. When Austria declared war on Serbia, Russia immediately came to its defense. As both countries were Slavic, while Germany supported Austria unconditionally, France and Britain were hesitant to get involved. Nevertheless, all these countries and many more would eventually join the conflict. But why did they? Well, for most of human history, international disputes were settled through diplomacy. But during the 20th century, things changed. The idea that war could be used as an instrument of policy became increasingly popular. This was due to the rise of nationalism, militarism, and the belief that war could actually bring about positive change. Unfortunately, this attitude would have disastrous consequences for the world. Over the next 4 years, entire generations would be wiped out. Economies would collapse and millions would be left homeless. It would take decades for the world to recover. And when it did, it would be a very different place. For the first time in history, women could vote. The Russian, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian empires would collapse. And fascism, communism, and totalitarianism would emerge as new forms of government. World War I may have been pointless, but it was certainly not without consequence. So, what should we do now? Well, if you want to learn more about this topic, I've included several additional resources in the description below. One thing I will say, however, is that it's important to remember the human element of war. While it can be tempting to focus on the big picture, it's also important to remember the individual soldiers who fought and died in this conflict. Many of them were teenagers who had no say in whether they went to war. Others were conscientious objectors who refused to fight on religious or political grounds. And still others were simply caught up in the conflict and had no idea why they were fighting. Whatever the case may be, it's important to remember that war is not just a clash of armies, but also a clash of individuals.